cloud. Okay, we are live, and of course now my cat's going to start meowing.
Yes.
And so welcome to our VSTE webinar. My name is Emily Heller, and I am on the board of directors for VSTE, and normally our executive director, Karen Richardson, does the intro here, but she just wrapped up one of our big conferences this week, and she's pretty wiped out, so I'm taking the lead for her tonight, and I'm going to kick it over to Tim Taylor, who is the chairperson of our education committee, and his committee sponsors these webinars. So Tim, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thanks, Emily. I really appreciate it. And I hope Karen is resting up because she definitely does deserve it. Again, appreciate the ones that are here. I already told Ron that usually we don't have a whole lot of people that show up in the actual live session. Just remember, Ron, it's all about quality over quantity. We have good quality people here, so that's all that matters. But we do have a lot of people that watch the recordings, and that's the reason we're recording it. I just got a chance to really kind of meet Ron this year. Ron Shultz comes from Eastern Mennonite University. He's in the teacher prep program there as a college professor. He's actually in one of the classes I'm actually teaching now, graduate level course at EMU, everything Google in the classroom. And so I've enjoyed having him in there, and thanks for the applause there, Ron. But Ron, anyway, I was looking around. We talked at the beginning of the year here about who we want for speakers. And I believe it was Tim Mays that actually brought about, it'd be nice to have someone speak about culturally responsive teaching. And I kind of reached out. I can't remember who all I contacted, but right away someone said, hey, you got to get hold of Ron Shultz. I said, he's the man to talk about this topic. I went, all right. So I reached out. Ron didn't hesitate. He was happy to do it. So he's going to be here talking about culturally responsive teaching and learning in a digital age. I think we'll put a little digital twist on it. So Ron, really appreciate you taking time to speak with us and share information with us tonight. So I know everyone's here to listen to you and not me, so I'm going to turn it over to you. You have control of the screen. So again, thanks for doing this for us.
Of course. Very good. Well, it's great to join you here, and thanks to Tim for the invitation. And yeah, this whole topic of culturally responsive teaching is really an important one to me, and in the particular in my role as a teacher educator, and where we're situated here in Harrisonburg City. I mean, other than I think they've determined that Harrisonburg is like the second most diverse school division in the state of Virginia, which is pretty amazing because it's a relatively small school division. But at least at our local high school, at Harrisonburg High School, there are like 60 plus different languages spoken at Harrisonburg High School. And some of the elementary schools have like 60% or more English learners in them. And so we've got a really culturally and linguistically diverse student population. And as I'm sure you are well aware, and it's probably true of the schools that you work in and where you serve, that the faculty, the teachers and staff in those schools don't don't represent the same types of diversity that we see among the student population. And so again, that kind of compels us as educators to think about how are we connecting with and providing an equitable education for this diverse group of students in our classrooms and in our schools. And so there's a ton of research, of course, to support the importance of this topic. And so I just want to touch base on a couple of sources that I've found particularly helpful, some of which I also share with my pre-service teachers, my students that I'm working with, and also in-service teachers that we have an opportunity to work with in some of the teacher trainings that we provide here in the Shenandoah Valley area where I'm located. Since it's a small group that's live, I would find it helpful, if you wouldn't mind, to just unmute yourselves and tell me your name, where you teach, work, and what your role is there. And so I did ask Emily that, but that was before the others of you joined. So Emily, why don't you go ahead and get us
Sure,
started?
I'll
And-
start.
okay.
So my name is Emily Heller, and I am an instructional technology coach at the high school in my division, which is Fredericksburg City Schools. We have one high school, James Monroe High School. So I am the coach there. And what was the rest of the information you wanted?
That was mainly it.
We're a pretty
Yeah.
diverse division as well. We're very
Okay.
small, and
Mhm.
we're Title I up through our 8th grade, but our high school doesn't quite qualify. But
Okay.
we're a minority majority school division, and we
Okay.
also face the same. We do a lot of work to try to move the needle on having our faculty be a better representation of our student body as well.
Yeah. Which is really hard, right? Because you can't hire teachers that aren't applying for the job. I mean, you know, you have to have a pool to
Yeah.
draw from.
And one of
so,
when
yeah.
I was doing my master's in ed leadership, my graduate project was I chose to do an improvement project for teacher retention and
Mhm.
teacher recruitment.
Yes.
And through my research, one of the things that I learned about was the kind of grow your own movement. And so
Yeah.
we, through that, have started as my part of my project, which has now become a reality, is we now have a Fredericksburg Teachers Academy class in our high school to try to encourage our own students to become teachers and come back and work for us. So we're hoping that long term that will help.
Yeah. Wow. No, that's great. That's something that we keep brainstorming about too, here in our area. And I can talk a little bit more about that later too, but that's becoming increasingly important, I think, trying to think how can we grow our own in terms of, yeah, future teachers entering, our profession. Sue.
Hello, I'm Sue Thoughts, and I work with a nonprofit called Common Sense, and I work on the education side, and we provide teachers with resources related to mostly citizenship, online, and engaging with online communities and culture. And so, but the biggest reason that I'm very interested in this topic is over the past, I'm going to say 3 years, I've been working with a group of teachers here. There are 6 of us here in Southern California who got together because we were not seeing folks of color join professional development, especially in the tech space. And so we found ourselves in conferences, ed tech conferences, saying, why is there only one Black teacher here? Or why are there no presenters of color here?
Mhm.
And so we all ended up getting together and doing some participatory action research, collecting data at various conferences here in Southern California, partnering with conference providers and developers. And then eventually, you know, when we all moved online, we made our own conferences. And we we really try to promote especially Black teachers who we see doing amazing things in the classroom and
Yeah.
saying, you need to present this, and not just in what we might consider education technology, but, you know, on the ways in which we are bringing culture into the classroom.
Mhm.
And so that is what we've been presenting on. That is what we have been really trying to hold folks accountable for. And yeah, we had our first anti-racist workshop at our Big Q conference, which is the California ISTE affiliate. So yeah, there were only 18 people there, which we're really angry about. But anyway, that's my interest.
That's awesome. But yeah, important work that you're doing. That's awesome too. Very good. Jennifer.
Hi, my name's Jennifer Blaze. I am an instructional technology coach in Virginia Beach, and we have a very diverse district, particularly with our military affiliation. So we always have people coming in from all over the world and joining our schools. So yeah, and then like someone was saying earlier, we have our VTFT at the high school level. One VTFT member gets a contract with Virginia Beach City Public Schools every year. So we have a pretty good homegrown base that we try to encourage our VTFT kids to come back and teach in the district. So that's
Excellent.
interesting too.
Yeah, very good. Karen.
Hi, Ron. We've been email buddies.
Yes, that's what Tim was saying. He was like, yeah, Karen, Miller often joins this group from Harrisonburg City. So that's awesome.
Finally, nice to meet you.
Yes, likewise.
I've been dealing with his student teachers and his cooperating teachers creating emails. Well, you got to jump through this hoop, that hoop, and all the other things.
Yeah.
Karen Miller, Instructional Technology Coordinator for Harrisonburg City Schools, the beautiful city in which EMU is located, that Ron is from, and we greatly appreciate his time and effort tonight. Yeah, you're right. We have lots of languages and lots of different. I was in a meeting this afternoon, and as being only in the system in Harrisonburg for a year and a half now, I'm just now seeing faces of teachers, and we do have I would not say a large diverse population, but we do. We haven't, especially with our homeschool liaisons and things like that. So we do represent a lot of different cultures, and I applaud Harrisonburg with how we work very hard to continue and work with those folks, and I'm in awe.
Yeah, definitely steps in
one language.
Yeah. Very good. I don't want to make assumption that those that don't have their cameras on would like to participate. I'll give just a second if either William, Sylvia, or Leticia would like to introduce themselves, but if you're
I will say, I know Leticia. She is somebody who I am in my Equity and Action group with, and I had invited her here because it always helps to hear another perspective on how somebody across the country teaches culturally responsive teaching. And so I'm so glad she is driving right now. It is her daughter who is typing me. So she's driving. You drive safely. Get back to that. So she's going to listen in. But she is a tech coach here in Southern California, and also a very active member of our community.
That's awesome.
Hi, this is Sylvia. I don't mind
Sylvia,
saying hi, but I'm eating dinner, so I thought I'd keep off camera. I'm an ITRT in Amelia County, and our county is about 11,000, 13,000 people, and 2,300 of those are Black people. And so I'm interested in the topic, how we can do better with including and being respectful and inclusive of other cultures. So I'm just interested in the topic as an African-American myself. And I know that, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes I'm the only one in the room, only one in the group, and so forth. So how we can expand and champion the what other groups have to offer and make that accessible to all people to learn together and work together and respect.
Excellent. Thanks for joining us, Sylvia.
Sure thing.
And William.
Good evening. I'm William Waller, and I am an instructional designer in Chesterfield County Public Schools. And an instructional designer is just I refer to it as a ITRT job on steroids. They require us to do a lot more than the normal regular ITRT is responsible for, which I am elated about. So and I am enjoying it. I'm at Meadowbrook High School in Chesterfield, and our school is primarily African American and Hispanic. So we have a lot of stuff going on, in that building as far as cultural diversity and the like. And so I look forward in hearing, what will be said this evening in this session.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much for sharing with the group here, a little bit of who you are. I think that it really helps me to, first of all, just have a sense of who is in our group here and the perspectives that we're bringing to the table. And let me be the first to say as well that while I have a definite interest in this topic and have seen and experienced in different ways the importance of it in school settings, I don't come to share with you really as an expert, so to speak. I really think that, as Sue mentioned, I think that the collective perspectives and hearing what others are doing and their approaches or things that we can share with each other is a great way to go for all of us to benefit from. And so because of that, I would welcome your participation. I have certain points here where I'll specifically invite you to share or to respond. But having said that, you are welcome to please unmute yourself, interrupt at any point to ask a question, make a connection, a comment would be very welcome. I do have some slides to share just to guide our conversation. And let me pull this over here. There we go, so that I can see everybody on my other screen. I don't know how those during COVID that needed to teach online with only one device. I don't know how they could possibly do it, because sometimes I feel like 2 screens isn't enough for everything that I need to see at the same time. But anyway, some goals and objectives that I have for this time together are to, first of all, just to develop a common understanding of the terms that we're talking about, right? Because they get thrown around, people say the same thing, but sometimes mean something a little bit different. And so I think that that's always important when we're having a conversation like this, is to clarify some of that, or at least where we're coming from. And then to explore characteristics of CRT and examples of what it looks like in the classroom, in your context, and as compared to my context, and how those ideas, again, how we can share those in ways that benefit each other and those that we work with. And then to consider, towards the end, considering the intersection of CRT and technology education. And again, I'm preaching to the choir here. And in fact, there's so much more when we get to this last part of this session, of this webinar, that you all are definitely the experts in the field. I'm very grateful to be taking this technology class with Tim Taylor this semester, specifically focusing on Google tools, and I'm learning a lot, and it's always a reminder of how much more there is out there that it's just impossible to kind of wrap your head around all of it. But to just take pieces and to keep learning and to keep growing and adding things that will enhance our teaching and, most importantly, our students' learning. And so those are the goals and the objectives that I have for our time together. So what is culture? Talking about definitions. And again, many could be defined in many different ways. These particular definitions draw from a book that I've enjoyed reading a couple of years ago called How to Teach Students Who Don't Look Like You by Bonnie Davis. I don't know if any of you have read that book or not, but I've found it to be a helpful resource. But she defines culture as this combination, this totality of ideas, beliefs, values, activities, and knowledge of a group or individuals who share historical, geographic, religious, racial, linguistic, ethnic, or social traditions. And so again, I mean, we experience culture on so many different levels. And I think that's in some ways what makes it a little bit difficult to even talk about it. Like, are you talking about the culture of my family or the town that I live in or the school that I work at or the country that I live in? I mean, there's so many layers of culture, right? And so I think it's important to identify, acknowledge that. And then thinking about, yeah, for each of us, the context in which we've grown up and how that impacts our behavior, our worldview, and just the way that, particularly as educators, how we approach not only our profession, but more importantly, the students that we're working with. And so whenever we talk about culturally responsive teaching, I think it's so important to, first of all, start with looking inward and aspects of our own identity before we then are at a place where we're really able to engage and interact with others whose identities and therefore cultures may be different from ours. And so just real quickly, briefly, a bit of my own story is that I grew up in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. So I don't know if anybody has any ties or experiences or knowledge of that area, but it's
Born and raised in Harrisburg.
Oh, really? Okay, so not far at all from Lancaster County. So yeah, I mean, people often think of the Amish community when they think of Lancaster. And I grew up in a Mennonite family, church, school system for much of my K-12 schooling. And so it clearly impacted my aspects of my own identity and worldview. And in fact, after I graduated from college, my first years of teaching were back 5 of the first 6 years were back in the same K-8 school that I went to as a student. And as you can tell from this picture from my 2nd grade class, which didn't differ a whole lot from the 4th grade classes that I taught a couple, whatever it was, 2 decades later. And yet in terms of the cultural diversity, there really wasn't a whole lot. But then partway through my elementary years, our family moved out to southwestern Minnesota for 1.5 years in a very rural community where no one had really even heard of a Mennonite before. And what on earth does that mean? It must be some sort of cult or something. And so rural. I mean, we lived in this farmhouse that was out along a dirt road. And so it was a whole different culture than what I had grown up in, even in Lancaster, in the Lancaster area. Then after my K-12 schooling and college and my first years of teaching, back and forth a bit between Virginia and Pennsylvania, but then moved to a rural area of Virginia, not real far from the Chesterfield area, where William is, but in Powhatan County. But that was again a rural area, but that was different type of rural than Minnesota. That was a culture, even before I started teaching in that area. I worked for a year for my wife's uncle who had a dairy supply business, which I knew nothing about dairy supply, but the whole dairy industry, farm agriculture community is also, of course, a different culture. And when I would need to answer the phone, I would sometimes need to hand it off to somebody else because I couldn't, the Southern accent was so strong, I couldn't understand what they were saying. And it took me some time to get used to that. And so, I think for all of us, we can kind of attest to perhaps needing to adapt to different contexts where a dominant culture kind of portrays or communicates in a different way, different priorities, different ways of doing things. And then the picture on the right represents a couple of the students that were at the school where I worked in Cusco, Peru for 6 years. And so adjusting to a Latino culture, and where, of course, it was a different dominant language that was used at the school and the community where we lived. And so all of that also gave me a real appreciation for and awareness of the importance of this being really in tune to the varied cultures that students in a learning environment bring to that setting, and the importance of being responsive to that. And so a resource, you perhaps have used something or experienced something like this before. This is something that we use sometimes in a teacher training that we do with our mentor teachers as they're hosting either practicum or student teachers in their classrooms, because we look to them to also engage in a conversation with the pre-service teachers about, again, this whole idea of culturally responsive teaching. Because we can talk about it in theory in our classes, in our coursework here at the university, but it's when they're in schools for their practicum experiences, that's where the learning becomes a whole lot more meaningful as they're interacting with various diverse groups of students. And so one of the activities that we encourage them to do is to have a conversation around this social identity wheel, where they first of all think about themselves, you know, again, their ethnicity, their experience in terms of socioeconomic status in their childhood, maybe even compared to where they're at now. And then you can see all aspects of identity around this identity wheel. And then having them think about, okay, well, which of these identities do I think about most often? Which do I think are most important or influential to who I am? What do I think that others, you know, what are aspects of my identity that they see as, you know, kind of front and center when they're interacting with me? And so it just helps to bring up a lot of, I think, really helpful conversations, and then allows the student teacher to also be thinking about, okay, well, how might my experience be similar to or very different from the students in my classroom? In your introductions, many of you already shared some of these details, which was really helpful in terms of how you would describe some of at least the perhaps racial or linguistic diversity of your school, your community. But I would be, I would also be glad for you to think about, and maybe even just put in the chat box, what are some other aspects of some descriptors of the culture in your school or your community where you live and work? Okay, more rural areas, a growing immigrant population, which is definitely true here in the Lancaster or in the Harrisonburg area as well. High poverty, food insecurity. Yeah, especially if your school division has a lot of Title I schools. You know, there's, of course, public schooling, and some of the resources that are available, you know, in the last number of years have certainly come a long way in terms of helping to address some of those concerns. regarding food insecurities, but nevertheless, it's so important for us to be aware of. One of 2 high schools is a performing arts school with rich arts culture. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and then even, yeah, comparing where you grow up to where you've grown up as compared to where you live now or where you teach, and even just seeing some of the real distinctives there are helpful to think about as well. Predominantly Jewish and affluent community. Yeah, so we've got, we're coming from very varied contexts, even in terms of this group and where, and the students that we're working with and the cultures that they represent. And so clearly an important topic. Cultural proficiency, Davis defines as the policies and practices of a school or the values and behaviors of an individual that enable a person or a school to interact effectively in a culturally diverse environment. And so I think one of the things that's really important to think about as well when we're talking about culturally responsive teaching is that, it's not just a set of practices or strategies to be applied in the classroom, but it really is a mindset. And so I want to dive a little deeper into what that means. But Tim, I'm trying to incorporate some other technology tools here into this presentation. So you can either use that QR code, or I will also put this link, if anybody has a preference, into the chat box to access a Jamboard. And again, no concern here about a right definition or matching my preconceived ideas of what culturally responsive teaching is, but it would just be helpful for me and for us to kind of to see some of your perspectives, your ideas, how you would describe culturally responsive teaching as we jump more into this topic. And let me know. I tried to make sure that the settings were right so that you can all add notes. Okay, Sue's giving the thumbs up. Good. So take just a minute to jot down some of your ideas and add to that board.
All right, I'm going to get back to my Zoom. All right, where's my Zoom?
Yeah, this gets challenging if you're trying to manage again. A couple of different tabs here on one screen. Yeah, we've gotten a couple up here. Yeah, they're jumping up. The meaningful connection between teachers and students, and it being very student-centered. Again, building relationships. Respect, open-mindedness. Oh, thank you for making those a little bit bigger. Yeah, I like this emphasis on being curious. right? Because it shows a real interest in our students. And instead of just always taking the approach of like, well, you're here in this culture or in this context or in this school, and so your job is to fit in here, and to learn to know us and do things the way we do, so to speak. This emphasis on also demonstrating, on demonstrating this curiosity and respectfulness and openness towards others' perspectives and others' experiences, and what we can learn from each other are really important. Super. So here are a couple of other definitions, and you're going to see a lot of similarities here. Geneva Gay, again, has done so much work in this area, describes it as simultaneous cultivation of the academic success and cultural identity of ethnically diverse students. And Bonnie Davis, who I referenced earlier, said it's cultivated through high expectations, rigor, relevance, and relationships while honoring students' cultural identity. And Zaretta Hammond, one of the most powerful tools for helping students find their way out of the achievement gap. And so one of the things that, as I even continue to learn even more about how to be a more culturally responsive educator, is the importance of also kind of balancing that emphasis on relationship, which is so important, and which many of you highlighted in your descriptors and your definitions, but also with really wanting to provide that level of education opportunity, supporting achievement and growth for those students. And so that's one of the things that I've really appreciated in a new way from Zaretta Hammond's book. I don't know, I'd be curious if any of you are familiar with her work, and the book in particular that's called Culturally Responsive Teaching and the Brain. Have any of you read this at all? Sue has? Okay. Again, a great resource that I would recommend. And I have all of these referenced at the end of the last slide in this presentation, and that I'll share the link with you so that you can access all of these slides as well. But in case there's any of these resources that you want to come back to later. But such a great book, and I will be highlighting some things that I found particularly helpful from that resource in this presentation as well. But Hammond, she goes on to talk about, so often we kind of look at our students from varied cultures, those from students of color, English learners, children from families living in poverty. And that's right, extra credit, Tim. And it's tempting, I think a lot of educators, even without intending to, project this kind of deficit lens on those students and think, okay, we've got to kind of bring everything down to their level so that they can be successful. And yet, what Zaretta is saying is that what we're doing is just perpetuating kind of dependent learners rather than helping them to move towards becoming more independent learners. And so, that doesn't mean that you just kind of, say, oh, okay, one size fits all, you can sink or swim in my classroom. That's not what that means. The scaffolds still need to be there at crucial times, but there's also this goal this trajectory of working towards giving them skills and strategies that allow them to become more independent learners, so that then the teacher carries less of the cognitive load, that the learner is able to utilize more of the strategies and maybe critical thinking processes more independently, that they won't need eventually as many scaffolds. And so again, I think this connecting, the way she connects brain research, which in the last decade has gained a lot more attention, with culturally responsive teaching, to me was a sort of a new twist and a really helpful way for me to think about this particular topic as well. And she uses this, Hammond uses this definition too for culturally responsive teaching, that it's an educator's ability to recognize students' cultural displays of learning and meaning making, and then respond positively and constructively with teaching practices that use the cultural knowledge as a scaffold to connect the students, their prior knowledge to new concepts and content in order to promote effective information processing. And at the same time, supporting that whole relationship piece. So clearly, this is no small task, right? It's a lot to think about when you are preparing a lesson. My pre-service teachers, they're, because we talk about, well, how are you differentiating, your lesson for the varied needs of students in your classrooms? And it's a lot to think about. And it is one of those things that does, it becomes a little bit less time consuming, or comes a little bit more naturally with practice. But at first, it takes a lot of intentionality to be attentive to these varied aspects and needs of the students in your classroom. But I always tell them the investment at the front end pays off later when you've got engaged students that know that you genuinely care about them. And so then it's all worth it in the end. So what are anything from this particular definition from Hammond, because there's a lot packed in there, but is there a piece of that that particularly catches your attention or that raises a question for you? You can either put it in the chat box or unmute yourself, either way.
I don't know that raising a question, but I definitely like that phrase of, when you're thinking of scaffolds, thinking of using cultural knowledge as a scaffold is an interesting lens. And that the previous slide, it was a light bulb moment for me, because I'm working with a lot of teachers to move them towards more student-centered learning and making their students independent and taking the load off of the teacher. And it's a shift in thinking, but connecting that with cultural responsive practice is not something I had thought of. And that just adds a whole new dimension. I love it.
Yeah, because the temptation is just to create an environment where they remain dependent all of the time, right? And ultimately, that's not going to be in their best interest. Thanks, Emily.
I think it's powerful, the part where it says just about the scaffolding, and that I feel like it says that it's the teacher's responsibility to make the positive, constructive connections that use the cultural knowledge. So if you're a teacher working with a predominantly some other culture other than your own demographic, you need to be learning about that culture and taking the time, and not just my students need to understand where I'm coming from. No, you need to take the time and make sure you're understanding where they're coming from. And sometimes I work at one of my other high school is a predominantly African-American school, and not that we don't have great teachers of many different cultures, but sometimes I think teachers need, although I'm not trying to teacher bash in any way, shape, or form, but I think that sometimes they don't stop and think about what's going on in home lives and what's happening, that their parents are working 2 and 3 jobs, and it's why can't you get this done in this time frame? Well, there's little kids at home and they're doing this, this, and this, and they also have jobs. And so I think that just we get caught up in the teaching of everything and not thinking about what's happening in their culture and in their lives also. Anyways, I just think it's very powerful, that part of the statement.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ron, I'm of course here. I'm in San Diego. I was visiting my daughter's classroom today, and of course it's very diverse compared to my school division back home. But you know, I was telling her I was impressed about how they're, you know, some of the students came up asking for help. And, you know, she said, now, you know, have you tried this? Have you tried, et cetera? And of course, now compared to the beginning of the year, she talked about how some of her students have come such a long way that some of them, really not a lot of them did come up. In other words, they've tried to solve and try to use as many of the tools themselves to try to come up with the answers or solutions, even worked with their peers. But the biggest thing, of course, is here it mentions about the importance, of course, being in a relationship and having that social emotional connection. Yeah, that's the biggest thing. She says that, you know, the kids now, she feels trust her.
Yeah.
They have that feeling of trust. So I think that's so huge. You can really tell when you go into a classroom, you can tell the students actually trust the teacher, and the teacher actually trusts the students. I mean, it just makes the world difference. And again, it's very diverse, but you can tell they feel comfortable, I guess, in their own skin when they're here. And it was nice. I got a chance to see parents come in and saw they were actually doing conferences which are student centered. And you know, you got to see the diversity there amongst within their families as well. But again, some of them came out. I was just sitting outside there when I observed a little bit, but they were just talking about how their student liked my daughter because the students did feel that, hey, you know, they trust her and they have that relationship with her. So. So a lot of this stuff's really spot on, but I got to admit, I was a proud father today.
That's awesome. That trust piece is so important, and I'm going to really have to do a little bit of flying here. I apologize, but I'm recognizing we barely have you know, much over 10 minutes left here already in the hour, and so again, you can come back and revisit more of these resources because there's a lot of information on some of these slides. But this is a framework that Hammond shares, and that starts with an awareness. And the way that we get awareness is by taking an interest in our students, asking questions like you were saying, whether that's, and this, you know, varies depending, of course, whether you're working with kindergartners or 12th graders, but some sort of interest survey, right? Where they get to share a little bit about who they are and what their hobbies are, their interests, or what excites them, or what's really difficult for them, or any of those types of things that gives you as the teacher, regardless of what your content is, it gives you really insightful information for them being able to connect with those students and then develop that relationship of trust. I didn't even really have this in my presentation at all, but I just grabbed it off of the shelf here in my office because I love this book too. It's by Kyle Schwartz, I Wish My Teacher Knew. And again, if some of you have read it, the feedback that students gave to the teacher when she took the time to invite them to say, what do you wish that I knew about you? And you know, some of them were very surface level sorts of things about them, you know, whatever my favorite color is, or what I like to play basketball or whatever. But other things were also then much more significant and really helped to develop that relationship of trust. Then the other 4 quadrants here, the information processing, the learning partnerships, and community of learners and learning environment. All 4 of these really work together to provide a framework that that draws on what we know about how we learn, how our brains work, and what that means, how that can help inform our own cultural responsiveness. And so I'm going to just go through again a couple of these slides without really talking too much about them, but just understanding that there are layers of culture, right? That we can't, it's not just about, you know, what are the holidays, what's the music, what are the favorite foods or typical foods or whatever of a culture, even though, those can be points of connection. But then there's also other layers of culture, unspoken rules, understanding that if a student doesn't look you in the eye when they talk to you, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're being disrespectful to you, right? And in their culture, it may mean the opposite. And so again, just having an awareness of those differences as you learn to know about your students. And the fact that the cultures that some of them are coming from, they're also their societal perspectives, their worldviews are very different. I remember when I was in my doctoral program at George Mason, for one of the courses that I was focusing on, that I was taking, that was focusing a little bit more, it was on cultural diversity, but and also specifically linguistic diversity, but also talking about the fact that there are some societies, and again, I don't think this is new information to you, but that some that are much more individualistic and others that are more collectivist. And, when you look at this ranking here from Hofstede's work, United States is right there at the top, meaning that the higher score of a 91 is more individualist, as compared to a lot of more Latin cultures, some Asian or African cultures that are much more collectivist cultures. And so what that means for the classroom and the ways that we engage the students and the ways that we provide opportunities for them to be collaborative and relational, that are such an important part of their cultures. And then also the difference between a more oral tradition and a written tradition. And so again, I thought that these were helpful perspectives. And then the information processing. And again, I think taking time to think about why students respond in certain ways in the classroom. We tend to hyper-focus on just behaviors, right? Instead of thinking about, well, what was behind that? And sometimes a student will react in a classroom because they don't feel like it's a safe environment. There's something about it that feels like a threat to them, either physically or emotionally or relationally. So their amygdala kicks in and they either fight, flight, freeze, or appease in some cases, in the face of that perceived danger. And so then when the amygdala is heightened, then is triggered, then their ability to process information, to access background knowledge, and to process new content or ideas it's like, shut down, right? It's this wall. And so until they can get to a point where they do feel safe in that environment, they're really not going to be learning anything in that classroom. And so again, I think that this is having teachers having this type of understanding of the type of environment that they are creating is so critical in terms of their abilities then to not only connect with the students, but then also for the students to be able to achieve and make progress towards the learning objectives for the lesson or the unit of study. She also identifies 6 culturally responsive brain rules. And so, this, a lot of times people from different cultures, they can still connect to information when we use stories, when we use music, repetition, art, movement, are great ways to engage students in whatever the content might be. And from the very beginning of a lesson, again, we kind of talk about, when I teach pre-service teachers, the different parts of your lesson plan, and we start with that attention getter or that hook. How are you going to captivate their interest? And a lot of that has to do with knowing your students and helping them to make a personal connection. And so, again, these are all really critical pieces of that. Yeah, Tim, I want to see those moves. The learning partnerships, you know, I'm a huge fan of Mel Nodding's work and many others that have talked about the importance of caring. And it's a critical part of culturally responsive teaching as well. I don't know if any of you have ever are familiar with maybe I had this in an earlier slide. Rita Pearson, who has since passed away, but she does a TED talk that I just think is so awesome, talking about the Every Kid Needs a Champion is the name of her TED talk. But she says that, you know, students don't learn from teachers they don't like. And it's a simplistic statement. And yet again, it really accentuates this importance of building relationships with students. This is also a YouTube video that's gone viral a number of years ago. Probably many of you have seen it too, where this teacher here in this left picture, he has a different, a personalized greeting, a handshake, you know, way of greeting each of his students as they come in the classroom. And just for, again, the way that sets the tone for in the classroom is critical. And with regard to this trusting relationships, that if we don't establish that kind of trust, then we're going to have students that are unwilling to take risks, to ask questions, to share a concern. And even if this teacher does praise them or affirm them in some way, they're going to be skeptical of what their intention is behind it, what the teacher's intention is behind it, if trust in that relationship is not there. And so Hammond goes on to talk about then ways that she calls them trust generators, in terms of the, you know, even sharing with students our own challenges or weaknesses, things that we found difficult, so that they can see that when they experience difficulty in their learning, that it's a normal thing. You know, it's not that they're not smart or whatever. And then, you know, connecting on similarities of interests, hobbies that they have, you know, as they're coming into the classroom, talking about, you know, maybe the game the night before, if they play on the school's an athletic team or a musical event or whatever it might be. And again, these can be applied to all students in the classroom, but I think that they're especially critical in making those connections across different cultures. And then some other ways, again, to create that learning environment that is that is safe, that's engaging for students. So in the last 2 minutes, here's the technology piece. What's technology got to do with it? And a couple of these are things that, again, that I've just learned more about through Tim's class here in the last couple of months. But personalizing the learning to meet the needs of individual students. And you all, I'm sure, are familiar with the wealth of technology resources beyond just the couple that I have listed here. But these are ones that I see being used in our local schools as well, to engage with students of very different levels in terms of their developmentally or different skill levels, that have been helpful. Strengthening relationships and connection with families too. Somebody mentioned the relationship with families. Well, I think, Tim, you were saying, you know, with your daughter's class and the parent-teacher conferences, that relationship can be intimidating, especially for beginning teachers in relating to parents of different cultural language backgrounds. And yet it's so important. And there are technologies that can really help teachers to bridge language gaps through, of course, Google Translate, but through Seesaw, Hangout, Google Meets provides opportunities to connect with families of students in those ways as well. Learning more about their students through having them create Google Maps or using Google Earth to share their own story with the class can be a really powerful tool. And there are lots of great resources on National Geographic Kids. Enabling students to communicate and collaborate with each other, even across their different backgrounds and skills. And so again, some of these resources can help with that, even in connecting classrooms, whether you're on the West Coast or the East Coast, or whether you're in North America or South America, technology gives us opportunity to connect across cultures and distance in ways that we weren't able to do before. And so those are, again, just a couple of different resources that are hyperlinked here in these slides. And so on this last slide, first of all, you can either use this QR code, or I can real quickly here put the link in the chat box as well. So either way, you can get access to those slides. And I have a YouTube video playlist here on the bottom that has some great resources too that I found helpful, again, in just understanding some other perspectives about culturally responsive teaching. And so your learning can continue beyond this time and space. So I apologize for the quick rush there at the end, but that's what I have to share this evening. And thank you so much for joining.
Ron, no need to apologize. This was awesome. This great amount of resources. I saw in the chat that, the slide deck. I mean, I already thinking in my head so many ways I could use this with my teachers, my ITRCs. And I know Emily and I texted about when it comes to coaching. But again, there was a good conversation in the chat. So I appreciate everyone that was involved to share their thoughts and ideas and also being involved. So, but Ron, you were spot on. I'm very proud of your technology use, man. Good job. I'll give you an A+ there. But yeah, but I mean, I've read, some books and I've read some articles, things like that. But again, the resources you shared were awesome. And definitely my reading list needs to add a few of those texts that you referenced for sure. But yeah, but just I mentioned there that some of the things, the graphics, the tables, et cetera, are really good. So again, really appreciate you, Ron, taking time to do this. I thought you did an excellent job. And again, I appreciate everyone. Yeah, I appreciate everyone that showed up this evening and allowing us to record it, Ron. What will happen is when Karen gets back in the saddle, Richardson, our executive directors, what she'll do, she'll send out a link to the recording and everything. And again, thanks a lot for everyone that attended this evening. Have a great evening. And Ron, we'll see you online in the course and everything. All right.
Sounds good.
All right. Thank you all very much.
Nice to meet you
Kim,
all.
I'll finish up as Karen and say thank you for chairing the education committee and for all the work that your committee does. And I'm so happy that when I had to turn my camera off, that Karen was able to join us through
That's right.
her picture, and she'll appreciate that. And thanks, Ron. That was amazing. My division has hosted a lot of culturally responsive trainings, and I honestly think yours tonight gave me more concrete takeaways that I can turn around and use tomorrow with teachers than any I've attended. So I greatly appreciate it.
Yes.
Awesome.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Take care.